Hi again, and now I would like to start with a very amazing ending study that was composed by Richard Reti. Now in this position it is white to play, and we see that black's pawn is really advancing to promote, and it seems pretty much impossible to stop it. Let's say that white plays king to h7, then black would just push h4, and we see that we are always far away from the pawn. Now speaking about that, whenever we have to stop a pawn, we might definitely count as we're doing, just calculate move after move. But there's another visual way to do it, which is to draw a square between the pawn and the promotion square. So here we draw a line and then we draw a square from there. Here if it's white to move, white should be inside that square after moving. So here we see that if white moves, white cannot reach any of these squares. In fact, here white is 2 moves short of reaching that square. So white will need to gain 2 moves here in order to be able to stop the pawn. On the other hand, we see that white has a pawn that is actually very easy to stop by black. In fact, if we draw a square, we see that black is within that square, so black can stop the pawn. But if black could waste 2 tempi to take that pawn, then white will be able to stop black's pawn. And here's where I would like to talk about the geometry of the chessboard, which is quite strange in a way. And here we have to go back to school a little bit and have a geometry lesson. Let's draw any right triangle on the chessboard. Let's imagine that we have this triangle. Now there was a Greek philosopher called Pythagoras who wrote a theorem, and he wrote that here the diagonal on this right triangle, which is called the hypotenuse, it's longer than the other sides of the triangle. In fact, there's a formula to describe that. In any case, we can see it visually pretty much that the diagonal, the hypotenuse, is longer. Even here, the arrows that I drew, the hypotenuse is longer. But if we count the squares on the chessboard, we see that here it would take white 3 moves to reach the square e5, and also 3 moves to reach the square h5. So in this triangle, right triangle that we drew, the hypotenuse is equal to each other side of the triangle. And this has a lot of implications whenever we play a game, which means that whenever we want to approach a point, the shortest way is not necessarily a straight line. So for instance, if we want to go to h2, we can definitely go this way, but we may also go this way and use the same number of moves in the process, which would be 6 in this case. So having said all that, you probably guess that now the first move by white is king to g7, because we are approaching the pawn, but we are also preparing to support the advance of our pawn. And here if black pushes the pawn, then again we play the same idea, king to f6. We are approaching the pawn, but at the same time we are planning to support the pawn. And amazingly here white is drawing the game. Let's say after h3, here we have king to e6, and although black promotes, we also promote because after c7, king to b7, although black can approach the pawn, here we would just play king to d7 and then promote, and we would get an equal position with queens on the board. Let's say queens, give a check, and this is just a draw because we have equal material. Alternatively, if black plays king to b6, planning to take the pawn, we would again play king to e5, with either the idea to support the pawn or to stop the pawn getting inside of the square and being able to capture it. Let's say after king takes, king to f4, and we stop the pawn. That's why this position amazingly is a draw after this maneuver of approaching the pawn this way and not directly. Now this idea can be used in many positions. Sometimes approaching directly is okay, but sometimes we can use this idea to win games. For example, in this position it is black to play, and here black played the move king to e4 first. Here black wants to attack these pawns, and black has many ways to approach this. One might think that this is the shortest way, but black can also come this way or even this way, and all roads are equally long. Here after king to e4, king to d6, here black played the move king to d3, and after king to c6, king to c2, Here white tried king to b5, which is an interesting try, instead of taking. If white takes on b6, then we would just take here and here. And this pawn actually here cannot be stopped because the king is far away. Let's say king to b5, and we will reach a very similar position to the one played in the game. And after king to b5, here black played correctly king to b3, interestingly opposing kings, but mainly defending this pawn on a4. If black takes here, after king takes a4, this would be an easy draw because white would capture the pawn. And after king to b3, king takes, here black took the pawn, and after king to b5, here actually black played king to b3, and then here white resigned because the pawn will be taken and there's no way for white to stop the pawn. For instance, let's say king to c5, we just take the pawn, and after king to c4, king to b2, this pawn cannot be stopped. White here is just one tempo short. If white here could play king to c3, white would stop the pawn as we studied in the previous lesson. By the way, here king takes a3 directly was also good because white is still not in time to stop the pawn, as we can see. Now if we go back to the position, we see that black took this road, which was first opposing kings and then went on to attack the pawns. But how about we choose this road? We go here. Then here after the move king to d5, if black plays king to d2, then here instead of going for the pawn, white can go to c4. And in this case, after king to c4, king to c2, king to b4, king takes, we get this position that we analyzed, which is a draw, because white will just capture this pawn. So as we can see in this case, taking the direct road to attack the pawns was not good enough to win the game. And black just took advantage of this idea to approach the pawn while stopping white's king from entering c4. So keep in mind this very important idea that with your king you can perform two actions at the same time, and that a straight line is not the only way to reach a point. There are other ways that are equally short and that can be better.